Well, hello everyone, and welcome to our first Orchest Community Event. Thank you very much everyone for joining. My name is Juan Luis. I'm connecting from Madrid in Spain, and I'm data scientist advocate at Orchest, and I will be your host today. So I have here with me more members of the team, including Rick Lammers, the CEO of the company. Rick, hello.
Hi guys, happy to be here.
I also have Jacopo Gobbi, which is our backend engineer. Hello, Jacopo.
Hello. Hello.
And finally, I also have Nick Post, our lead designer. Hello, Nick.
Hello.
Okay, so first of all, I know that we have people connecting from Spain, the Netherlands, Bulgaria, UK. So please leave a comment and let us know where are you connecting from. And by the way, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel because there's a chance we make more of these events in the future. So I'm going to present you what is our outline for today. So I'm going to wrap up very quickly this welcome introduction, and I'm going to pass it on to Nick so that he can explain the new user interface concept that we designed. Then our engineer Jacopo is going to do a review of the performance improvements that we've introduced. And after that, I'm going to do a project walkthrough with a real Orchest Cloud instance so that you can see how to import one of our examples or templates and how to tailor it to your needs. Finally, Rick is going to talk a little bit about the roadmap, what's next in the pipeline for the next few months. And I'm going to close with some acknowledgements to our community contributors, to our team, and start with the Q&A session. So without further ado, Nick, would you please tell us what's in for the new UI?
Sure. So here at Orchest, we're interested in making the experience as user-friendly as possible for everyone. So after sort of joining the team 4 or 5 months ago, I did a bit of an analysis on the information architecture of the product and also ran a few user studies as well to sort of see what were the key sticking points that our users had when using the product. And some key things sort of came up. So off the back of these learnings, there are a number of improvements that we wanted to make. The first improvement that we made was sort of around the key editor experience. So we've updated the interface and we've added a few new features within this redesign. The first is a file manager. So you're going to be able to see all your project files in context and side by side with your pipeline. And there's this great interaction where you can drag and drop these files onto the pipeline and string them together within just a couple of clicks. It's really, really seamless overall. We also have a new pipeline session manager, so you can click between your pipelines very easily, as well as a pipeline toolbar. And we've changed the backgrounds from a grid to dots, so that's very fun. And then alongside these pipeline improvements, we also noticed that a lot of users were getting a little bit frustrated with the number of dialogues that we had in our product. These dialogues were providing useful information, but they tended to obstruct workflows quite a bit. So what we wanted to do is to keep that system status, but ensure that we sort of unhindered workflows as much as possible. So we've moved a lot of our design patterns to this build status indicator now, meaning you can sort of go into your project and go into your pipelines as quickly as possible, and then we'll let you know when they're ready to start working with. Alongside this, we've also added this redesign to the other entities across Orchest. So product-wide, we've worked on aligning the consistency of the product. So you'll see here in the job view and the environment view, we have these entity lists on the left-hand side. So all the different jobs that you have, all the different environments that you have are in the left-hand side. And also the primary actions are all in the top as well. So in the top right-hand side, you'll see for the new job, the environments, also for the pipeline as well. We've basically kept the primary actions in exactly the same place. These were sort of spread across the product in different ways in the old design, and what we wanted to do was make it as easy as possible to find what you should be doing next in these designs from screen to screen. We've also updated the navigation. So there's two different types of navigation that we have in the product. One is sort of going across projects, and one is going within projects. And we wanted to optimize for both of these different types of navigation. So for the cross-project type of navigation, we created this project drawer, meaning that from anywhere in the product whatsoever, you can go through your projects, you can create projects, you can import projects. From any page whatsoever, not just the projects page. So that's super useful. And then once you navigate between these different projects, you can navigate within the projects using this simple tab navigation. So before, these tabs could often be hidden behind like an icon or a hamburger menu. And that sort of made it a little bit confusing to navigate between these things unless you knew the product well. We wanted to make it as simple as possible for people to just pick up the product, know exactly where they want to go, and work with it from there. So I'll hand it over.
Well, thank you very much, Nick. That was super nice. So I am passing now the torch to Jacopo, who is going to tell us a little bit about the performance improvements that we've made on the product lately. So, Jacopo, all yours. Whoops, you're muted.
All right.
There we
Thank you. All right. So I was saying, I get straight to the point. Well, when it comes to performance, we focused on two different topics. One are pipeline runs, while the other is environment builds. So how long it takes to run pipelines in Orchest and how long it takes to build images or environment images in Orchest. The reason for that is that Orchest is not only software in which you schedule jobs. That would be quite boring. It's also somewhere where you write things, prototype things, and you run your pipelines as you write them. Of course, to do that, or to do that nicely, you need a tight loop in a certain sense, right? So, of course, what we wanted to do is to have Orchest introduce as little overhead as possible when it comes to running pipelines and when it comes to building environment images. And another reason on why we needed to do this, let's say, kind of rework, at least in some parts of our logic, is that when we migrated from our ad hoc Docker-based, let's say, Orchest to Kubernetes, we, of course, had to fit and sometimes force things from our way to the way that Kubernetes expects you to do things. So we introduced, a bit of technical depth and a bit of, let's say, strange angles when it comes to the logic. So, of course, we wanted to, clean this up and with the insight of after the migration, we wanted, to improve things, of course. So when it comes to pipeline runs, what we did was, in a certain sense, pretty simple. Of course, we cleaned up our technical depth. We improved the way we were configuring and tuning the cluster, Argo, which is what we are using in Kubernetes to schedule things around, and the way we configure, again, pods and containers. And of course, since most of our users are on a single node cluster, we made the Orchest backend aware of that fact. The Orchest backend is going to be aware of the fact that the cluster is running in single node or multi-node. And when the cluster is, and so based on that, the pipelines will be, or at least the pods will be scheduled in a different manner. So when it comes to if, for example, when running in single node mode, all steps of the pipeline are going to run in the same pod to cut away all the overhead which comes with creating pods, waiting for them to come up, etc. While, of course, when in a multi-node mode, each step of a pipeline will be its own pod, so that in this way we can distribute load across the cluster. Again, this is, I think, pretty simple, but super effective, actually. So, and this is what this is for runs. When it comes to environment image building or building images in Orchest, basically in Kubernetes, I would say that the state of the art when it comes to building images within the cluster is to build the images in a pod in the cluster through some tool like Canico or BuildKit or Builda, then push those images to a registry, and then eventually a pod will be scheduled which needs to use this particular image, so the image will be pulled to the node that on which the pod is scheduled. But as I mentioned, we wanted a tight loop when it comes to at least the interactive workflow in Orchest. So what we wanted, for example, we wanted to avoid users having to tune or rebuild their environment and then wait for the image to be pushed to the registry, then wait for the image to be pulled from the registry into the node just to run a step or to start a kernel backed by that image, etc. So we did something which is a bit maybe unorthodox, and we started building images directly on the node by talking to the container runtime, which is of course a perhaps expensive bridge of abstraction on our side, because we will have to pretty much know or interact in different ways based on the Kubernetes flavor that the Kubernetes is running, that the cluster is running on, and based on which container runtime is being used by Kubernetes. But this gives us of course, a lot nicer experience when it comes to users, because that means that the users we will not need to wait for an image to be pushed or pulled anymore, because the image is going to be already on the node waiting for the user in a certain sense. Of course, this bridge of abstraction gives us the responsibility of knowing where images are across the cluster, and also the possibility of doing that. Meaning that when it comes to the interactive scope of Orchest, like interactive runs, kernels, or terminals backed by environment images, we are going to schedule those pods on nodes that we know that already have the image, while to not have too much single node pressure, of course, or node pressure on a particular nodes, the non-interactive scope of Orchest, meaning pipeline runs part of scheduled jobs, like cron jobs, are going to be scheduled in a less constrained way, meaning pretty much across the entire cluster from the beginning. Of course, once an environment image has been built on a particular node, there is also another component of Orchest which then takes care of distributing the image across the cluster. But that happens asynchronously or later, so that, again, the user can just build an environment and get straight to running pipelines or kernels using that environment. And, well, I would say that's pretty much it from me. I hope it was clear enough. And, well, thanks for listening.
Well, thank you very much, Jacopo. That was super insightful, and it sounds really hard. So thank you very much to you and all the rest of the team who pushed for it. So there are some comments in the chat asking, for example, if this is available already for the cloud version. And the answer is yes. So as of a few minutes ago, you are able to create a new instance in Orchest that will have all the new version that I'm going to show right now. Okay, so it's demo time. So I'm going to now proceed to sharing my screen, and I'm going to walk you through a real project. Let me see. Okay, there we go. So that you can see how to import one of our examples and use it effectively. So we're going to follow the example of one of our blog posts from a few weeks ago. So how to make the most of your Google Analytics data with Orchest and Meltano. And this is the architecture that we're going to follow. So there's a BigQuery instance that receives data from Google Analytics 4 all the raw event data so that we can manipulate it in any way we want. And then we're going to use Meltano inside of Orchest to extract that data from BigQuery and then load that into a PostgreSQL service of our choosing. So first of all, this is what you would see right after creating an Orchest instance. This is my work instance, so you already see there's a bunch of projects here. And you can either import one project manually if you already know the Git repository URL, or you can navigate here to our example projects where you will be able to see a few of our templates. So for example, you have this quick start that is very typical, but then things related to visualization, image super resolution, how to combine different programming languages, how to use Arrow or polars inside of Orchest, and so on. So in the last page, we have this project as one of our examples, and I'm going to proceed and import it. Here it gives me the option to change the project name, but this one is fine. And so the first thing that happens right after I import the project is that the environment starts building. So while that happens, let's describe a little bit what do we have here. So it's a very simple pipeline of 2 steps. So we're going to describe what they do later on when we can open the editor, but basically this one is setting things up and installing all the Meltano requirements and so forth. And then this performs the extract and load step. And apart from these 2 steps, there's a couple of services that at the moment are not running, but that are going to start when the session starts. So we have our Postgres service that is going to act as our warehouse. And we also have a Metabase service, which is an open source business intelligence tool that we're going to use to visualize the data in a very appealing way. So while I was talking, the environment already finished building, so you can go there and see what the environment is made of. So you see that we're using the Python image and that we're installing certain system and Python requirements. And here you can inspect the logs and verify that everything works fine. Okay, so now it's the time to see what these steps do. So I can double click here and that is going to bring me to Jupyter Lab. And when this is ready, I will be able to use Jupyter Lab just as a normal editor inside of Orchest and to use all the capabilities that it has. Sometimes it takes a few more seconds, but this is almost there. There we go. So we can see, for example, that the setup.sh is a bash script that performs a few commands here, and that I have another bash script that performs a Meltano run from the BigQuery source to the Postgres target. So before going any further, as explained in the blog post, I need to generate some credentials from BigQuery. You have all the details written there, but basically, if you go to the service accounts and configure the appropriate permissions, you then will be able to generate a new JSON key like this. And this is going to download a new file that then I will be able to use inside of Orchest. So I'm going to copy this file name for later. And I'm going to go back here to my pipelines, and I'm going to create a new directory inside of /data, which is the shared location for all the projects. So it's going to be called GA4 Orchest. And then inside this GA4 Orchest, I'm going to upload the file that I just generated. So I have it right here. There we go. And now that I have the file itself, I need to declare an environment variable here, going to the pipeline settings that says Google application settings. And here I have to write the full path, so G4 Orchest, and then the full name. I'm going to quickly verify that everything looks good. Google application credentials, actually. This is because it's already pre-configured in the pipeline. And I'm going to save, and that's it. So now I have my credentials file configured. and I need to do a couple of extra steps. So for that, I'm going to launch a new terminal session. And this allows me to show you another of the big things that we introduced in this version of Orchest. So as you know, the terminals in Orchest have been usually associated not with any of the kernels or the environments, but more to a global space, so to speak. And we made some changes here so that you can connect directly to the environment as it's running. So that, for example, if you want to check the Meltano version that you specified before, then you can have it here directly. So I'm going to use IPython and the Orchest SDK very quickly. Import get service, so that I can retrieve the internal host name of the Postgres service, because this is automatically generated. There we go, this one here. And I'm going to copy this value, and I'm going to use that to set the configuration of the target. So now I do Meltano config target Postgres. This is going to show me the current configuration as it stands now, but the host is localhost, which is incorrect. So I'm going to say set host and then use the internal host name that was automatically generated. Finally, I need to do one more operation. So I need to set up a password to a non-empty string. This is for configuration purposes. And after I do that, I will be able to display the new configuration, which should contain the host that I set, there we go, and the non-empty password that I need. Okay, so I'm going to now go back to the pipelines, because now everything is ready for me to proceed. And I could either click and run either of the selected steps, or I could select both of them and run them, but I can also just use the run all button that we just introduced recently. Okay, so now this is going to start running. You can see that the step is producing some logs. At this point, it's installing some of the internal components that Meltano needs to extract and load the data. So it's installing tap, BigQuery, and target Postgres. And it's also going to display the current state just to verify that everything works. So the two plugins got installed. No state ID is found because it's the first time that we run the pipeline. And this step is completed now, which means that the next one is already starting. Since no state was found, and it's going to start from scratch, I can already see that there's some SQL queries being thrown at the BigQuery database over the network. And after all the Google Analytics 4 events are extracted from the source, is going to dump them or load them into the target, which is our Postgres service that is running here, even if it's not exposed. Well, looks like there's some error. The live demo gods were not very kind to me. So we can see what exactly happened. And we could scroll up here. Okay. So it's not exactly clear to me what's going on here. This appears to be a Meltano error, but since I already prepared for this kind of event happening, no, I'm not really sure what's going on. But anyway, fear not, because I have the analytics, I have the backup project here. So as you can see, the previous time that I did this, it was working. And this is how a successful log looks like. So both of the steps are completed and there are no errors here. So after I have the data in the warehouse, then I can just go to my Metabase service here It's probably not starting because of session issues, so bear with me for a moment. Analytics, there we go. So I will have to stop the other session because it's using the same storage, and so it's clashing. So I'm going to go now to analytics finished. I'm starting the session again, and let me verify that the metabase is working correctly. We'll give it a few seconds for the logs to appear. There we go. I can ignore that warning, no problem. And looks like everything should be working now. So it's connecting to the database. And once the service is fully up, I'm going to double check here. So it's still connecting. Okay, so it's taking more time than expected. Okay, so I'm going to leave that working in the background. I don't want to make you wait anymore. So I'm just going to show you how the end result looks like. And in the end, when everything finishes loading, we can use Metabase over the Google Analytics 4 event data so that we can visualize it in any way we want, which is not limited by the possibilities of the Google Analytics 4 user interface. So I think I'm going to wrap up with that and go back to the presentation. Sorry for the small technical hiccups. And I'm now going to invite Rick for the last part so that he can tell us a little bit about what's in the roadmap and what are we expected to see in the coming months.
Thank you for the demo, Juan-Louis. I'm sure we can get Metabase working. But I'll give a quick presentation about the roadmap, which I think can be interesting for those watching to understand a bit about where we're heading, as you've now seen where we are today with the new UI and the performance improvements. The first thing I'll talk about is the SSH key management to have the Git credentials managed by the Orchest application. As Jacopo explained in the beginning, one of the ways in which Orchest is different to other data orchestration tools is that we also provide a development workbench, so to speak. So it's a platform for running the data pipelines as scheduled jobs, but at the same time, it's a place where you can develop your data pipeline. And one of the nice things about this is that it integrates with your development workflow, which for most people involves using some sort of remotely hosted Git hosting service to manage your source code changes. So we want to make sure that there's a smooth handoff between when you're pushing new code to your remote Git hosted service and you're pulling it back into Orchest, and maybe when you make changes to the code in Orchest, you push it back up to your Git hosted remote service. And one of the ways in which you can do it is in Jupyter Lab using either the terminal that's included in Jupyter Lab or the Git GUI extension for Jupyter Lab. But those both depend on Git credentials being configured. And that will be fully integrated into the new version of Orchest. And it will allow you to more easily use Git from within Orchest, even for projects that you might have listed as private instead of public. So that's one thing to look out for. A big feature that we've been requested many times over is the REST API. It's actually a pretty crucial piece to integrate Orchest into a larger system, because you might want to have automations that check on the status of job executions, but you might also want to trigger job executions based on external events. So the REST API will allow you to inspect state of any running job or pipeline in the Orchest cluster, but also submit new jobs and import projects to run new jobs for, so you can have fully automated triggering. Another area that we are looking to expand the declarative capability of Orchest is around configurable retry logic. And I think this is particularly useful because sometimes when you're building a data pipeline, you as the author know a bit better than our system can assume what kind of failures can cause a step to fail. And sometimes because you know that there might be a little bit of a time delay before some external system becomes available, you want to set the retry count to a higher value than just one. So you want it to retry on failure up to a certain number of times, and maybe you want to mix that retry logic with a certain timeout. So we're expanding the expressive capabilities and making the retry logic and the timeout logic more configurable for you to be able to build more robust pipelines that work exactly the way you want it to as it interacts with your other systems in your data stack. Finally, we're looking to expand error reporting because when something fails in Orchest, it can be either through some failure related to the code that you own as the author of the steps in the pipeline, but it could also be that there's something wrong with the Orchest system. Of course, we work very hard to avoid that kind of error, but we want to make sure that if we do have some issue with the Orchest system, that we inform you in the most informative way. And sometimes the failure message was lacking in the past. So we're improving in that area. Another concept that we're adding is the Orchest ignore file. And it is actually a way to express to the Orchest system which files you want it to copy when a new job is created from your project files. If you've not used Orchest much, or you're not familiar with how projects work in Orchest, it's basically analogous to a Git repository. So usually you import an existing project as a Git repository, and when you are creating a job based on the current snapshot of that project, you want to probably copy at least the project files to that job to run. But sometimes you also want to copy files that are not part of your Git history, maybe because they contain secrets. So secrets in general can be configured through environment variables that will not be stored to your Git version control system for security reasons, of course. But now there's a capability to express adding files to the project specifically that will be copied into the project job, but not version to Git. So those can contain secret as well. You can source them using things like .env, or the file can just be read in, like with the example Juan Lu showed, where a JSON credentials file lets you authenticate with Google Cloud Services. Finally, I want to mention another item about Git integration. Again, we want to make sure that there's a pretty seamless experience working with a traditional software development workflow and integrating that with your data pipeline development activities in Orchest. And so the Git flow will actually allow you to trigger a job execution. So your pipeline will run with a version of the code that is the latest on your Git branch. So for those who are familiar with a platform called Heroku, already know about this behavior. It's sometimes described as Git flow or Git ops based deployment, and you'll be able to push directly to a Git branch, and that the push event will be detected and can be used as a trigger to create a new job. So then you can automatically trigger jobs that have code that maybe is reviewed upfront through a pull request or merge request, and then when the merge succeeds to a production marked branch, it will deploy a pipeline run directly in Orchest. I think together with improvements like the REST API, this will give you very powerful capability to have more granular control over how you run your data pipelines and which ones you consider to be in development environment and ones you consider to be more protected and production ready in terms of the quality review. We have a bit of an audience poll we want to do for the next for the REST API implementation. We are curious if you have any preference for the way we want to expose the OpenAPI specification that will ship with the product. So it will be an in-product page you can open just to check out the specification of the REST API. Do you, as the viewer, have a preference for any of these different OpenAPI-based viewers? Please let us know in the poll that we just opened up on YouTube. And that's it from my end. Thank you for listening, and I'll give the word back to Juan Lu. Juan Lu?
Thank you very much, Rick. We will let the poll open for a few minutes. And just before I go to the acknowledgement section, I am very upset that I had this temporary failure while I was doing the demo. So let me just close the loop because everything
Let's
is back
rectify
to
that.
working.
Woo!
So you see, this is where I was before. So the pipeline is already working and so forth. So I can open the Metabase service like this. And
Nice.
then you see that I can already explore the table with the events and everything. And I can perform any questions. If you're already familiar with Metabase, you're going to probably know this already. So these are like all the events coming from Google Analytics. And then I can do things like, okay, give me only the page view events and give me the count of rows if I group by the hour. So that gives me something like this. And then I can keep grouping things like that, and finally change the visualization to a stacked line plot like this. So this is exactly what we have in the blog post. I'm going to save that, and just for you to see that it was not just a screenshot, that it's very, very real.
It's real, folks.
Okay, so now it's the time to make an acknowledgement to all our community contributors. So allow me to say their names out loud. So thank you very much, Sam, Sebastián, Alessio, André, Jacobo, Manuel, Corné, Srikant, Vivan, Mitch, Abid, Seida, Daniel, Max, Olga, and Howie. Nobody paid you for making this contribution, and no matter if it's big or small, if it's a typo in the documentation or a bigger feature, as some people have contributed, we really appreciate it and we are very thankful for it. And finally, the biggest thank you to the team. This is the people that make Orchest a reality. So this is Rick, Yannick, Jacopo, Juan Ming, Navid, Danik, Nick, Rasmus, and myself.
And
And
you.
we're very happy to be here and to having been able to share all this news with you. So that's it from us. We're going to let the QA session begin. We hope you enjoy the presentation. And before we start, you're already free to leave your questions in the comments. But we would like to invite Jay to the stage here. Jay from LinkThings. Hello, good afternoon.
Hey guys.
Welcome, Jay.
So Jay has been using Orchest at his company for very long. And so we would like to invite you to ask us anything you want, or just share what impressions do you have from the new Orchest version.
Yeah, so maybe I can ask Jay a question to kick things off, and then if there are any more questions in the audience, feel free to add them. Jay, can you tell me a bit about why you guys decided to even build data pipelines over at LinkThings?
Sure.
What prompted it? What prompted the build?
Sure. We are a company that do a lot of business intelligence for clients as one of the themes. But what we were running into is that there's so much different APIs out there, and we used Azure Data Factory for a lot of things like on-premise systems, but it just didn't cut it for all the external APIs. So we thought, what's out there? And I know Yannick from a while back, and I knew he was working on the Orchest, and we just started working with it and talking to you guys about what the possibilities were, and yeah, we use it quite a lot nowadays.
Nice. And so one more question. How do you think about comparing something like Orchest with something like Airflow? I know a lot of people have heard of Apache Airflow because it's one of the oldest orchestration projects that have been created. What do you think in terms of trade-offs? Have you guys looked at solutions like Airflow or something similar?
Yeah, we have looked at a few options, and we also use the Singer, for example, the Singer SDK, and see what's there possible. But mostly the things is you don't have that much trouble of setting things up in Orchest. You can just go ahead, use the cloud version, and start off right away, which just saves you a lot of time, and you can focus on your code rather than the whole environment setup.
Got it. Makes sense. What kind of dependencies have you already used in Orchest? Are you just using Python, or are you using something else?
We're mostly using Python now in order to extract our data, do some analysis on it, and write it back to the data warehouses that we set up. But yeah, I think this is just the tip of the iceberg. Get our team familiar with it, and started working from there.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of teams find themselves in a position similar to yours, where they're trying to build some muscle around data pipeline development, and they're also learning as they go about what will work for their team. Is there anything you would have as advice for teams that are getting started with data pipelines and building out their first version? Something, you know, you could give them as advice that you wish you'd known when you were starting out building your very first type of Python automation?
I think you just need to go ahead and try it. I mean, at first I thought, yeah, it's nice to have such a program as ADF where everything's done for you, but you lose a lot of flexibility. So uh, try to make use of that flexibility as it's there, and it doesn't cost you that much in terms of setting up in complex environment. You could just go ahead and go for the code that you want and run it somewhere.
Amazing. Good advice. I think you have to just get started and see what works and learn as you go. That's how a lot of people teach themselves programming. But just to end, what would you say is like one of the biggest things you're missing from Orchest? Let's try to discover something that we can do to make your lives easier. What's currently not so great about using Orchest?
Yeah, I was happy with the roadmap that you showed. A lot of points are in there, but yeah, you're kind of spoiled with Azure Data Factory, for example, in terms of integrations with all kind of connectors and everything. Of course, that's not where you are focused on, but that's something that we really like as a team because you can just get started really quick. On the other hand, I saw the error reporting was in there. Sometimes it was quite frustrating not knowing why your pipeline failed or whatever. Uh, but I guess with the roadmap in mind, your guys are going in the right direction.
That's good to know. And we'll write down the notes and look into how we can make data connectors more available and more easily accessible without having to write everything yourself, because of course nobody has time to do that.
True.
Thanks,
True that.
Jay, for your contribution. We'll move to Abid, who is also one of the users. And is actually a very knowledgeable data science writer as well. So you should check him out and follow him on Twitter for cool articles. Hey, Abid, how are you doing?
Hi Rick. Hi John.
It's good
At,
to
Welcome,
have
at,
you.
at
Abid.
the back, at the backstage, I was just testing all the new, functions, and I have like cracked a lot of things.
Yeah, I'm
And I
sure
have like
there are
list
some
of
rough edges in there. We got the release out, but we're definitely doing some Q&A this week and next week. So I saw a good recommendation about the session not giving you a warning. So that's a good addition that we'll focus on. Abid, can you share a little bit about your background so the audience can know a bit about who you are?
Actually, I started with machine learning engineer at the start, and somehow, the things changed. I think the world more me into writing the blogs, teaching things. Because when I was like finding something niche on web, it was very hard to understand what they are talking about and how they are delivering. I thought, why not I make it simple for other people that the things I have to learn very hard way. So that's how I start writing, and that's how I'm like now as a copywriter and editor for KD Nuggets and DataCamp, and I also write for Medium, Towards Data Science, and other publications too. So my journey started with participating in ML competition, mostly on Kaggle and other. And I'm very competitive. I like to like get at least top 10 and try to like use any kind of cheat sheets or anything just to get a 1% edge on. So most of my pipelines, most of my work, early work is revolve around that machine learning. And yeah, that's it. And that's how I came to know about Orchest, and I use Orchest. I wrote about it and I love it. And I think new features are very like now I see the team is listening to the user, not they are developing the things that they think is right. A lot of features that you have added, I was just surprised. Oh my god, it helps the user a lot in navigating things, because I don't have to know like find a single button uh, and waste 5 minutes of my time to find the single button. It's already there. I know I have to click on the Jupyter lab and it will open. I don't have to click the that file and that point of pipeline to access it. It's quite intuitive now, and I have seen a lot of changes, and I love it. Every file is on there. I still have some issues with um, I still have some environments, creating environments still taking time, even though if the environments are completely similar within the same project, it will take time. And I don't see any version of Python or Julia until unless I start the environment. Then it tells me that it's in between 3.9 stuff. I don't see, because it's very important for me to know the version, current version of Python, or what version is it running, or R, Julia, and JavaScript is new. And I have one more question about like what are you using for services, like for out URL? Like mostly it's for local URL. What are you using for global URL for the services, running services?
So the question you're asking, if I understand correctly, is you would like to know about services and about how you access the URL.
Yeah. How is it accessing? On backend? What are you using?
So the way a
And raw.
service Yeah, so the way a service works in Orchest is that it is part of the ingress of the Kubernetes cluster. So when the service is defined by the user and a session is started, it will actually create this as a new deployment within the Kubernetes cluster with an ingress. And so once it's registered, it will be a route that can be visited if you have exposed it as a setting. But the authentication will actually use the authentication of the entire cluster, which is the proxy that actually has an authentication request based on your user session token. So if you are logged into Orchest and it's an authenticated endpoint, you only will be able to use that ingress endpoint if you are authenticated. But you can also add authentication-less services if you want endpoints to be available maybe for public data dashboards and the likes. But it's a great question.
Do I have to add it in services section? Authentication required. Do I have to add, or
Yes.
does it create the like key for me, like private key for me or for anyone? Uh,
So
can I just
the
one?
authentication is just a checkbox item on the server
Okay,
settings
okay.
page. So, but it's a good question. We also see examples where you could use the password features that are baked into the service that you're running. So, for example, the Meltano or the Metabase dashboard that Juan Lu just shown has an authentication layer in itself. With its own user accounts. And so if you disable authentication for that endpoint, you won't be able to use it because you can then use just the Metabase authentication. So you can create users there. So it depends a bit on what service you're running, how authentication can be configured. That's the kind of flexibility.
Can we have like separate environment like requirement.txt file for creating environment, so that we can share that single file instead of like whole project, uh, and at the back end it can just run on Mamba or Pip or Conda, whatever, because currently I have to add it into this setup script. I have to run it. It's not like very good. I think the file is creating the file requirement file is quite intuitive, and we are used to of using that and sharing. Let's suppose if someone have created an environment and he thinks everything works, you can run. He mentioned he just have to send me that file and I can just add
I
it
love this
into my
question.
project.
It's why we made it possible in the setup script of the environment to just point to a file that is part of your project. So in the project, you can add a file like a requirements.txt, or even another setup.py, or another pip, basically package manager file that describes your dependencies, and you can just make only the changes to the requirements.txt and not touch the environment setup script anymore at all. And this is actually what we usually use in the demo projects we have. So if you import the blog post example Juan Luis just showed, if you open that environment, you'll see what it looks like. It's just pip install -r requirements.txt. But it's a great question. I see we're coming up on 53 minutes, and we scheduled for about 50. So I want to thank you, Abid, for joining the stage with us. Very exciting. I want to thank you for teaching so much about data science to newcomers. Your articles are a great starting point for people who are new to the field. And we really appreciate all the input you give us at Orchest. It keeps us sharp, and it pushes us to do better with building a product that has the right features and the features working in the way you would like to see them. So thanks, Abid, and I'm sure we'll chat more offline.
Yeah. See ya.
Ciao.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Abed. So we have now a question coming from the chat. So Fat Post asks, where do I go if I'm interested in contributing to Orchest, and what are the ways I can contribute? So the best thing to do would be to go to our GitHub. You can share the screen so that you can see that live. So I'm going to do just that. So if you go to our GitHub repository, which is where we have all our source code, Orchest, you're going to notice a few things. So, for example, we have some contributing instructions here that, in fact, just redirect to our documentation. And in here, you can see the different ways in which you can contribute. As you know, in open source, there's much more than contributing code. So either by just using the product and let us know if you find anything suspicious, or giving us feature requests, you're already contributing to the project. But if you want to add some code or documentation to the repository itself, then you can check out our development workflow that explains how to install a development version of Orchest and everything. And even if you want to make a documentation change, you probably don't need the whole development environment for that. So you can go directly to GitHub. The read the docs interface drops you here directly. And then when you go to one of the branches, you can click this pencil button and make an edit straight away. So this is like a very simple way of contributing without even having to install anything locally. And yeah, I hope that answers the question. So it's now or until the next time to leave more questions to the team. It can be either to Nick or Jacopo too, which are waiting for us on the backstage. And if there are no more questions within the next few seconds, I think it's a good moment to wrap it up. Okay, yeah, so I think that's all from us. So again, thank you very much for joining. We hope that you enjoyed the presentation. Remember that you can get started with Orchest for free online on cloud.orchest.io, or you can download the whole application for free. It's open source, it's for you. And stay tuned for future updates from our side. So I'm going to bring back the team just to wave goodbye, and see you next time.
Thanks, everyone, for joining.